Speaker make it clear.
Order. Well, I did not make the comment.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen 8, where we wrap the week's current affairs with a panel of bloggers and opinion shapers. Joining me tonight, she is one of New Zealand's best-known public academics and tireless critic against unfair free trade deals from the University of Auckland, Professor Jane Kelsey, and she is a Green Party candidate, Indigenous rights activist and blogger, Marama Davidson. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, in tonight's Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement Special, Issue 1. What are the dangers to New Zealand in signing up to the TPPA? Issue 2. Does the TPPA represent corporate colonisation? And Issue 3 tonight, how is China going to respond to the TPPA? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off tonight with Issue 1. At the Bali Summit, John Key has finished America's work for them by herding the 12 TPPA member countries into agreeing to sign the deal off by the end of this year. The TPPA has 29 chapters, but only 5 of them are focused on trade. The other 24 chapters are about dismantling our economic sovereignty for the domination of US corporate interests. John Key says he wants a deal done as soon as possible so he can get home and discuss the issues with us, the citizens of New Zealand. Jane, why does John Key think agreeing to the deal in secret before we the people know what he's agreed to? Why does he think that's an appropriate process?
Because if they showed us what's in it, we'd say no and they couldn't do the deal.
That's pretty extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, but no, the US politicians have actually admitted that that's the reason for the secrecy.
Right.
And in fact, if you listen to Tim Grosser here, you know, he's expressed concerns that the longer this goes on, the less chance they've got of being able to pull it off.
So it's a bit of a scam, isn't it?
Well, it is, and it's the kind of thing that if we were looking at the cabinet, you know, the old Muldoon days when Muldoon exercised executive power by passing the parliamentary and democratic processes, and there was outrage. Well, the good thing now is that there is starting to be some outrage about this. And I think that's why there is this intense pressure out from APEC to keep ramping up the rhetoric that they can close it off by the end of the year, even if all rationality says that it's not possible.
Do you think they're going to be able to close it off by the end of the year?
I never say never,
Yep.
because this deal has now become so highly politicised.
Yes.
But the magic that was going to do it was if Obama was in the room.
Right.
Once Obama wasn't there, their ability to cut through the resistance, and this growing resistance in some places, especially in Malaysia, you know, that went out the window. And they've got a real mess with at least 4 of the US must-have chapters. So if they were going to find a way to crunch it, it would have been there. There won't be another meeting of the leaders before the end of this year. The trade ministers will get together again at the beginning of December in Bali again for the WTO. But you know, without that magic little impact of Obama, I can't see how they could do it.
So if capitalism is reliant on John Key to be the charm offensive, they're in some pretty desperate shakes?
Well, it was interesting to see the debriefing in the US after the meeting, because John Kerry's lot are actually saying, well, he helped lead the discussions and John Key was there because New Zealand is the administrator of this agreement. So all of this stuff about how somehow Key is so important over-eggs the omelette.
Right. Marama, Indigenous people around the planet have been betrayed by numerous free trade agreements. How can Māori believe their interests have been protected by a government that's more than happy to ignore the treaty when it comes to selling off energy assets in New Zealand?
There was the treaty, and then there is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which the government, you know, tried to claim as a bit of a human rights victory and Indigenous rights victory. Those don't even appear to come into the conversation in terms of the negotiations. And what we have, as you've pointed out, what we've seen around the world are free trade agreements that further colonise Indigenous communities. In Mexico, NAFTA, you know, did a rough deal on small communities maintaining their own economic sovereignty and their ways of living, and you know, countries no longer have to favour those local businesses and those smaller communities.
That's right.
And so ultimately that leaves Indigenous communities, self-sufficient communities, really out on a limb.
And it's a double whammy for them, isn't it? Because poverty is already a problem in those areas.
You know, the work of Mākere Stewart Harawira is quite important because she talks about Māori already, you know, facing the negative indices, you know, through colonisation and generations of it. This free deal agreement, I'm not sure if it's trade, it's a deal between countries, is a further wave of colonisation on top of what we've already been hammered with. And so, you know, on the one hand, we can say, oh, this isn't new, but we need to be able to understand this is on steroids, and this is further going to impact on those, you know, since the 80s, the neoliberal reforms, this is more of the bad stuff.
Jane, the mantra repeated is significant progress. The Environment chapter still has 300 areas of contention. The US hasn't tabled their chapter on intellectual property, and they still haven't managed to define what a state-owned enterprise is. Where was the significant progress?
Well, the significant progress is that the original wording the US wanted was substantially concluded, and the other countries said, no, you can't say that. It misrepresents what's happened.
Right.
And it's interesting because that came out in the Japanese media.
Yep.
And the Japanese media is getting access to quite a lot of information.
Right.
You know, given the obsessive secrecy here, we rely on what's available elsewhere. And I think that's really significant because it means that some countries inside the Club of 12 are themselves not going to be rushed and are very nervous. The Malaysian, the Malaysian spokespeople in APEC were saying there are real impacts on our sovereignty and our right to regulate and make our own policies, and we are very wary of that. Now, for that to be coming from inside, alongside the earlier statements from the Chilean negotiators and so on, shows that it's not just technical problems in pulling it off. There is, in fact, kickback happening within the countries at the negotiating table.
So the significant progress was just what? It's to give the perception that momentum is being incurred? Or the Americans have just said, this is what we're going to do, you're all going to go along with it?
Well, the US isn't getting its way, and that's the reason why the 4 chapters that are stuck. And some of them are real must-haves for the US. It's made a big fuss about the state-owned enterprise chapter, the pharmaceutical issues, which were in 2 of the chapters, the IT and internet stuff. Now, those are big commercial constituencies, and they will be making sure that the Congress, their people in the Congress are fighting on that. Likewise, the Environment chapter that's stuck is part of the Democrats' NGO constituencies who also have members of Congress on their side. And the crucial factor is going to be, if Obama doesn't have, and we think he won't have, fast-track authority to get Congress to agree yes or no to any package deal at the end, they will all pick it apart. So any governments that sign up to a deal that Congress can say, well, have this bit, but we won't have that bit, thank you, is crazy.
Marama, as partners to the Treaty of Waitangi, should Māori have been briefed directly about a new treaty the government is signing us all up to, which may infringe upon the old treaty?
Well, of course, because, you know, the Treaty of Waitangi was supposed to have affirmed our sovereign status, but absolutely that has not happened around the world with other Indigenous nations and their treaties as well. What I'm worried about is, and certainly traditional and Indigenous society worldviews are not restricted to Indigenous peoples. I think that human communities understand that the paternalism that is happening here goes completely against good values of sharing and distribution and the health of people. And what I'm worried about is this agreement seems to separate social issues from economic and trade development. And the Treaty of Waitangi holds us in good stead in terms of protecting our environment, protecting our people, our living systems and our resources. And around the country, Māori, but not just Māori, communities are starting to stand up for our environment, our waters, Kaikoura, for example. are standing up against oil drilling. Now, what will the TPPA do? What is it called? Investor-state disputes?
Yes, yeah.
You know, if they disagree with the community and with any laws that might protect from oil drilling, for example, can they sue the shit out of us?
Yeah.
So I'm really worried about the Treaty of Waitangi and what that means in terms of our guardianship, but I'm worried for communities in general and protecting our communities.
And of course, it's difficult enough for Māori to be able to have their voice legally heard within New Zealand, within a jurisdiction that is supposedly supposed to respect the treaty.
It feels like we're just, you know, barely ants on the wall of this, in the room of this negotiation going through.
Final question to both of you on this section. With the current vicious partisanship in the American Congress, is there really any chance Obama can get this through?
No, the current assessment from the US end is that he can't get it through without fast track, and he won't get fast track because the Tea Party hates these agreements.
Yep.
And the Tea Party seems to be effectively holding the rest of the Republican Party to hostage.
Yeah.
And Obama won't move for fast track unless he knows he can get it through. That certainly means this year he won't get it.
What if they sell this as a national security issue, though? If their argument is this isn't really about trade, this is a national security, and we're going to fast track it under those grounds.
There are too many commercial interests that are involved in this.
Yep.
And when they're looking at national security, one of the things that happens in the US Congress is that they get really extreme. And so they would insist that these extraordinary things get put into the agreement. And currently one of those is the allegation that Japan is engaged in currency manipulation.
Yep.
So they're wanting to have special provisions put in there to stop currency manipulation. Now, if you want an incendiary device to blow up the whole agreement, that's one.
Right.
So that's just, you know, if they wanted to run that national security line, I think that they would just, that would be very good.
Are the Tea Party crazy enough to derail all of this?
Oh, they're crazy. But what Jane's Kōrero just reminded me of, actually, and this is why I'm wondering about how the deal will be fast-tracked through, is, and I don't know where this is at, but Australia wanted a clause put in to reject the state investor disputes.
That's right.
New Zealand said, oh no, we don't want them to have special rights in the clause. So, you know, what are we doing? We are trying to say, no, countries shouldn't look after their own interests, and we are just going to be such a lapdog to the US in terms of what they want to push through.
I believe that's exactly what we're saying. Thank you, panel. Moving on with our second issue tonight. Beyond the wild promises of billions of dollars in extra trade, the only benefactors of the TPPA seem to be American corporate interests. Marama, Māori lost 95% of their land within a century. That was a total decimation of their economic base. Does the TPPA represent a corporate colonialism that is threatening what little remains of Māori?
Yeah, absolutely,
economic sovereignty?
and an insidious colonisation and imperialism that I said before, it continues. What we can look at, so as a Māori woman, the neoliberal reforms, the free market ideologies already have hammered the shit out of us. We have been the ones at the end of domestic violence, poverty, health and education, all of those areas where we haven't done so well, precisely because our status and what it should be and what it has been since Papatūānuku was as a central role and leadership force of the whānau and hapu community. These sorts of paternalistic deals completely override that, and that has happened around the world, and it has ended up to this place where we are today. You know, when we can look forward to Māori women taking our rightful place back in the world again, these sorts of trade agreements wouldn't even get a shit show.
Right. Jane, how can this deal protect economic sovereignty when it opens us up to being taken to court in a jurisdiction we don't control, and we're up against corporations who have profits that are actually many times larger than our GDP?
Well, it can't. And I think the point that Marama has been making is crucial for us to be focusing on what are the challenges that confront us and how do we move forward differently from the failed neoliberal paradigm of the last 30 years. And The government will say in relation to the treaty issues, oh, there's a treaty exception provision there. Well, but the treaty exception provision requires the government to acknowledge that there are treaty issues involved.
Right.
And if we take the electricity privatisations or we take the current issues around the mining, it says it's not a treaty issue, let alone the issues about what would reduced access to medicines mean for impoverished Māori and impoverished other communities, or the tobacco issue, which the Māori Affairs Committee said is fundamental for Māori, but it's not seen as a treaty issue. And what we've seen is consistently these companies now bringing these cases, not only the tobacco ones that people tend to know about for the plain packaging, but there is Eli Lilly, a US drug company, is now seeking $500 million damages because the Canadian Supreme Court had the temerity to reject a patent application there. You've got Lone Pine Resources, a US mining company, that's seeking $250 million from Canada because of a fracking moratorium for 2 years in Quebec. This isn't fanciful hypotheticals. These things are happening, and this puts in the toolkit of transnational corporations incredibly dangerous devices. And we know that not only national governments but Labor governments in the past have backed off when investors bring pressure to bear.
Marama, some iwis themselves have been very corporate focused.
Oh, good on you.
Is Māori capitalism any less venal than Pākehā
This is a
capitalism?
really important point that, again, Market Stuart Harawira makes, is when you have had a neoliberal assault, we ourselves, especially those who the Crown has privileged into leadership positions from our own communities, have started to adapt and take on board these philosophies which take us completely away from our philosophical worldviews. And Māori women have a key role in trying to pull us back to that. So you're absolutely correct. We ourselves, to survive, for so many reasons, to survive, to get ahead, because we've fallen sucker to all of these ideologies, have in certain places started to adopt economic policies that destroy papatuanuku and families. One of my cousins put up her baby had been healed by kawakawa balm, which she went into the bush and made, and her baby had been healed from the eczema. Now, where we used to be a holistic society, holistic health, we used to have this knowledge, and we used to be able to look after ourselves in a certain way. I'm really worried how pharmac will impact on our ability to look after ourselves and the pharmaceutical culture that they bring with them. Apparently in the US, there is a pill for everything. It used to be we can look after our health, we can stretch, we can go for a walk. If you get a little bit of a pain somewhere, there's a pill for everything. So I'm also worried about what that does to our culture of holistic well-being.
Where do you think the leadership in terms of within Māori capitalism needs to come from? I mean, for example, there's lots to be fairly ashamed of in terms of the Sea Lords deal, isn't there? Isn't there?
With we saw, and I think I might have been in primary school, but we saw Māori women, and including Māori women, leading the mobilisation purely because of some fundamental philosophies that we have as Indigenous, as tangata whenua. So again, I think Māori women can play a key role in terms of Māori considering the impacts of this sort of trade agreement.
Jane, our own negotiator, has privately admitted in a WikiLeaks cable that New Zealand doesn't get anything out of the deal, yet John Key is claiming it will raise billions. Why is it the mainstream media far more critical of Key's claims on this than they are?
I think we're seeing a turn in the mainstream media. The Herald will continue to run the
They
Herald
love
line.
free trade. They love it.
But they will also publish op-eds and so on, even though Fran O'Sullivan complains consistently.
Busily.
But there was just an editorial in the Dom Post which was quite critical, both about the secrecy and about the implications on medicines and so on. And I think because we've now got mainstream groups like Consumer New Zealand coming out and saying that they are worried about what the implications are. You've got the IT innovation industry, which has to be the basis for future economic development in this country, expressing those concerns. And I think the fact that David Cunliffe, despite what Phil Goff might be saying, appears to have opened the door a bit to a debate means that the ground is starting to shift in mainstream media.
Question of both of you finally on this. If we do pass the TPPA, will we find ourselves in court for passing laws to protect New Zealand jobs? Is that how insane this is going to get?
So my understanding, and I think this is an important point that I wanted to make, is one of the big issues is this can be complex if you have not immersed yourself in this sort of area of economics. This can be complex to the average New Zealander. So I am trying to, if you're not in there running with it already and trying to pick it up as a new thing, I am really struggling to get my head around actually what does this all mean. So sorry, ask that question again.
Will we see ourselves in court?
Okay, so the brief concentration I've been able to do from around the world in other court cases, I think absolutely powerful businessmen and leaders of transnational corporations will not hesitate to stick the bejesus up us if we threaten some sort of policy that is going to inhibit their market and their business.
Anything that protects New Zealand jobs, we might actually see ourselves in court over?
Well, there's a whole lot of different ways that they can attack it. For example, in government procurement, central and local government uses taxpayer and ratepayer money in ways that historically support local communities and local jobs. And I know local government and central government are looking at the living wage as being a condition in those contracts. That will become incredibly difficult. Likewise, the future job creation and downstream benefits are in innovation. If that gets blocked off because of the monopoly rights on intellectual property by offshore, we're stuck there. If we look at a whole range of other kinds of possibilities of how we might have job creating future economics, it's not in the neoliberal paradigm that underpins this agreement.
Thank you, panel. Moving on finally with issue 3 tonight. This entire process is more to do with containing China than economic prosperity for the Pacific. So what does Beijing do? Jane, how does China respond to this?
Well, that was fascinating this week at APEC. At the debate I did with Wayne Mapp last night, he was arguing that you've got the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement there, and you've got the mega agreement that China is involved with and the US is not, called the RCEP. New Zealand and Australia and Singapore and so on are part of both, and so eventually it'll be one happy world and they'll blend together in a blended family.
You can't be serious with that analysis, can you though?
Oh, well, this is Gross's view as well. But if you look at what China was saying this week, China Post, which is, China Daily, was saying Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement is US imperialism, basically. China, at the APEC meeting, said APEC needs to take the lead as the overseer of all of these different agreements, coordinate them. There needs to be disclosure to everybody in APEC about what is happening in each of them, which terrifies the hell out of the US-led TPPA negotiations. But the crucial point about that is that China chairs APEC next year. So this agenda from China that is implicitly anti-TPPA and saying we need to have an overview through APEC, which we are going to be the chair of, means APEC is no longer a forum next year where they can run this agreement on the sides as they've been doing, and which is going to force the ASEAN countries and the countries that are trying to play both together off the fence post and into a public debate.
Marama, are we at risk at damaging our economic relationship with China by sucking up to America?
I had this little image, the wonderful Selwyn Manning, and him and I having a discussion about the way that we've been, at least 10 years having these negotiations with China, having these discussions, And then the US put their hand up and we just fawn and fawn. And it's like, new lover, I'm going to, profess undying love to you. You've just come up with this and thrown it in there. And that's what I just can't stop giggling about.
Yeah.
But it's actually not very funny for for China
Yeah.
as well, who might be sitting there thinking, what on earth? You freaks, you know?
We've given you some love and where's the respect?
I wonder about the brick companies trying to utilise some sort of a co-opt, as Jane's just been referring to, that could, come through the ASEAN countries as well. And I wonder if that's an avenue. Someone and I talked about a wedge strategy of possibly using Taiwan and Hong Kong to get in, but it seems more likely that it may touch on what Jane is talking about in terms of co-opting agreements outside of the TPPA.
Let's wrap the show with final word. Jane, your final word this week is?
My final word is go sign the petition and to bring this text out into the public domain, www.itsnotright.org.nz. Watch the celebrity video of great people like Don McGlashan and Te Reira and Michelle Accord and Wana Maniapoto. It's not democracy, it's not right. Sign the petition now.
Marama, your final word this week?
We have to thank our commentators, our people who are rubbing these deals and finding out for us, for me, the mum with the kids who honestly is struggling to get my head around it. We have to thank Jane. We have to thank Annette. We have to thank people like Selwyn. Now, if it weren't for these people, what on earth would we have as communities, as families, trying to get our heads around it? And I was reflecting on that this morning when I was trying to come into this show and be a credible commentator. And I thought, where on earth would our country be without these people? I think we owe some reflection on that.
Amen. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Marama. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word, signing a free trade deal with America in secret without actually explaining to us, the people who empower Mr. Key to be leader, what the bloody hell he's signing away in terms of economic sovereignty is beyond abdication of responsibility. It is a full backhanded slap in the face for democracy. I say free trade with America because the term is a nonsense. It's like good cancer or clean coal. There is no such thing as free trade with America. The TPPA is a US national security leash aimed at curtailing Chinese economic influence in the Pacific. The billions that Key keeps claiming exist in this deal for New Zealand simply do not exist. It's like Key has taken our economy to Bali and has rushed back having sold it for 3 magic beans that he got that Obama has given him. Where's our economy, John? I've swapped it for some magic beans. I see. This is dictatorial, not prime ministerial. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night out here, though.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on